and the students and mentoring them. And I think this is just one example of you putting your efforts into organizing this, and this is a fantastic turnout here. I want to thank all the participants across the continents. Looks like we have people from various continents here, all the way to India, Latin America, Middle East, Europe. So it's nice that you took your time from your different time schedule there, wherever you are. So I'm going to spend about 45 minutes talking to you about field scale testing, which on this couple of projects focusing on leachate recirculation. Obviously, a lot of good research requires good site support and funding to be able to buy stuff, support students, and so these three sponsors really have helped me quite a bit over the last 20 years. Waste Management has been a great partner for me, given access to a number of sites and number of projects. Environmental Research and Education Foundation has really grown to be a big, landfill-related research uh, funding agency in the US, and of course, US National Foundation, Science Foundation, which supports a lot of fundamental work. So this project, which I'm going to show you, has a lot of different components applied all the way to fundamentals, and I'll do my best to cover some of the key elements in this webinar. I have had a number of students and people in the site helping me, and the names are a huge list. But there are two students who did PhD, and of course, when you do PhD, spend 4 years with the faculty advisor, you work really hard, and these students really stand out actually. And with this, I also want to take an opportunity that I think Krishna mentioned that a lot of my work is field scale. I really I'm very thankful for the fact that I got an opportunity when I did my PhD with Professor Benson. It was really one of the best experiences. It just changed the way I looked at things. Otherwise, I really, it's really opportunities come your way or you create them. So if you're a student working in the geotech, geoenvironmental field, I really highly recommend to get involved in field aspects of the project. It will change your horizon completely because it really gives you opportunities to come up with solutions to problem, kind of like a solution which I feel very good about I came up with in this particular situation. So getting back to the leachate recirculation topic, I'm assuming many of you are very familiar with landfills in your countries. And landfills is pretty much the most cost effective and probably most environmentally friendly with respect to the amount of money we spend alternative for managing solid waste. Countries like Japan, they have more incinerators, they don't have as much landfills, but maybe Germany too have a lot of heavy recycling programs. But most of the countries in the world rely on landfills because it's by far the most cost effective method. And if it's designed properly, it's environmentally probably a much better option. So when we talk about landfills, obviously good engineered landfills have liners and leachate collection system. So when you have a good liner and leachate collection system, obviously you're going to collect all the leachate. Now, where does that leachate go? Because you're protecting the groundwater below the landfill. But then if you throw that leachate on some other land, well, you are just taking the contaminants from one place and spreading them somewhere else. So that's not really sustainable. That's not good for the environment. So landfills do generate a lot of leachate, and they also generate gas condensate. So when the gas is formed, there is some condensate, which has a different chemistry than leachate. But both when you combine, it's a liquid discharge. In the US, and I'm going to talk about where this leachate goes. But in the US, 80% of the states in the US allow recirculation. Some of them do not because of the concerns with leachate recirculation, which I will talk also. But also beyond leachate, some landfills do take liquid waste like septage from septic tanks, some industrial liquids, or sometimes even wastewater. And rarely, but I have seen some landfills take surface water and groundwater when the waste is really dry, which should be avoided. Because we really don't want to create more leachate in the landfill than it already creates. And UK actually banned many of these additional liquids, and I'm sure there are countries which do not allow the second blue box, which I'm showing on the screen here. But I'm going to talk mostly about the leachate recirculation. I personally believe the recirculation is really important to know, or is one of the important strategies, because you want to keep the contaminants generated within the waste, within the footprint. You do not want to take them and spread it somewhere else. So if you're able to manage it within the footprint, ideally, that's the most environmentally sustainable, at least philosophically to me. How much leachate MSW landfills generate? Well, I'm going to give you US landfills. I have a lot of data from US landfills across from California all the way to pretty much Virginia, New York, where I worked on a number of projects. The landfills in California, which is a very dry state, most of the parts of California, generate about 100 gallons per acre per day, which converts to about an inch of liquid going through the landfill per year. If you're more comfortable with inch, like, for example, in California, the rainfall is about 5 to 8 inches, depending on the location. So, about 10% of that goes through. If you go to East Coast landfills, they're about 600 to 1,000 gallons per acre per day, where the rainfall is about anywhere from 50 inches to 60 inches. So that converts to about 12 inches a year. So that's about 15-20% of the annual rainfall. So depending on which country you are, what the rainfall is, it's fair to assume that you may get 10 to 20% of your rainfall as your leachate on average. Of course, it could vary depending on your operational practices, but that just gives you an idea how much water leachate you have to manage. What does happen to this leachate in the US? Well, I can talk about US pretty well. You'll be surprised, almost 80% of the leachate in the US is managed by discharging into wastewater treatment plants. That's where our sewage, municipal sewage goes to. Now, when the sewage treatment plants, generally, operate and treat sewage, which could be billions of gallons per day, not billions, but maybe billion or hundreds of millions, depending on the size of the city. The leachate from a landfill is a small component of that. So usually it's a dilution. So this wastewater treatment plant, when they treat the leachate, they actually not necessarily can treat for the heavy metals present in the landfill or some of the organic constituents. Maybe some organics degrade because of aeration and some other. Sorry, I'm able to hear some echo. Could everybody mute their microphone? Hello? Can somebody mute the microphone? Krishna, are you getting a mixed noise here on the background? I think maybe it stopped. So, okay. Anyway, so discharge to wastewater treatment plant is the primary strategy in the US, which I think is, that's how landfills manage it. But a lot of them are interested in recirculation. When the cost of wastewater disposal is very high, they're interested in managing it differently. So that's where leachate recirculation comes handy, because you can manage it within the footprint. You're not paying for any discharge cost to wastewater treatment plants. And then, of course, leachate evaporation is becoming very common method, actually. And that is actually partly done by irrigating the leachate on the surface of the landfill. So it's not really a subsurface recirculation. It's more a surface application, which causes evaporation. Some landfills are also using, of course, the gas heat to evaporate leachate. They almost have like this equipment, gas evaporators they're using. And of course, in very small number of cases, I have observed at least, there is an aerobic, anaerobic treatment system on the site, which is relatively expensive. So if the landfill is big enough, generating a lot of leachate, they can justify that. So these are the primary methods. Now, what are the benefits of recirculation? I mean, if you look in literature, the benefits are very clear. But I can tell you one thing. The major benefit a landfill owner is interested is really trying to defer the cost. Instead of spending the money discharging the leachate to wastewater treatment plant, if they can manage it within the footprint, that's their main reason. All these reasons otherwise are really secondary for the owner of the landfill. They are really good reasons for environmental point of view and sustainability point of view. So, to me, the first reason is probably the most attractive, which I have said a number of times so far: zero discharge. So if you do not discharge leachate outside the footprint of the landfill, you're truly keeping all the constituents within the footprint. That to me is environmentally sustainable, because otherwise we're just spreading the contaminants and raising the background levels of some of these constituents. Wherever the wastewater treatment plants are discharging to the streams and rivers, they're really diluting majority of the constituents. So by keeping them, to me, that's a zero discharge. Especially now, you heard the word PFOS. In the last few years, PFOS is a big concern. We use PFOS in our daily life for a number of years, and we probably still use part of it. So all these PFOS containing materials have been disposed in the landfills because, we use those clothing, shoes, the food packaging, which contain PFOS. So there is PFOS in the landfill leachate right now. So, and now we realize PFOS is is definitely is a contaminant of concern for human health, ecological health. So if we recirculate leachate and not able to discharge it, well, we can keep the PFOS within the landfill footprint. So that's just one example. The other reasons for recirculation, of course, post-closure care period. When you recirculate leachate, you produce gas early on because you are enhancing degradation of waste. So when the gas is produced earlier, the waste becomes inert, so-called inert, sooner. So that can decrease the post-closure care period. Also, there is some limited data that shows recirculation can help the leachate quality improvement. Of course, the data is very scattered, but generally it makes sense. And also, you can have enormous settlement when you add liquid. While you're concerned about slope stability, if you are able to maintain the slope stability, you can get a lot of settlement from injecting leachate in the landfill. So in landfill business, the volume you gain is the money you make. That volume you call airspace. So there's a lot of settlement. Well, you can fill that landfill more because most landfills have a geometrical constraint. They do not have a constraint on mass. So you can pack the landfill as much as you want, as long as you stay within the boundaries of the surface you have a permitted for. Just to give you an idea for leachate, discharge costs. So when a landfill owner decides to send the leachate to a wastewater treatment plant, they could be paying anywhere from about half a cent to 10 cents per gallon in the US. So generally on the East Coast, like New Jersey, New York, the costs are very high, 10 cents per gallon. So they really, would like to find another option to manage leachate, because a typical landfill generates anywhere from 20,000 to 100,000 gallons per day of leachate. So you can see the numbers add up very quickly. One thing I want to emphasize is that, when you inject leachate, it's not a permanent storage. You get a lot of benefits, but some of that leachate is making its way back to the leachate collection system. So it's a temporary storage. This data actually is from Professor Benson's work on bioreactor landfills. This is a very good data set, which clearly shows a conventional landfill, which you can see, this is the settlement or measured over a period of almost this is almost 3 years, so almost like 10-year period. You can see the settlement in a recirculation landfill is about 4 times higher in a given same time period, and even much higher in the earlier part here, you can see. So that's the gain in the airspace. That's the gain in the landfill volume you get sooner by recirculating leachate. So that's just one example here. There are, of course, drawbacks of recirculation. That's why recirculation is not done at every landfill, and at even a given landfill, it is not done every day, 24/7 or the whole life. It's done on an ad hoc basis because it's really slope stability. If you keep pumping in leachate, you saturate the waste, you're going to decrease the shear strength. And at some point, depending on the slope, you may have slope stability problems. Of course, if you oversaturate the waste, you're going to have odor issues. Leachate will break out. It's not a very pretty sight, and I have seen that. So it's really, the leachate recirculation has to be done in a dosing system. It has to be carefully planned, and you want to recirculate various parts of the landfill on a cycle, not just the same area, keep pounding with leachate. You can't do that. So that means you need infrastructure or piping to some extent, spread across the landfill. So you're spreading that leachate all over, not just in one area. If you flood the landfill, you can have gas wells which can get flooded. If the gas wells flood, well, you're not getting any landfill gas out of the landfill. That means if you have a gas to energy plant, well, that's going to starve up gas. And a lot of these gas to energy plants have a minimum requirement for the operator to run that plant to produce energy, and they are on a contract. So they can't just flood it and shut down the system, just like you see in Texas when the power goes down. A lot of people are suffering right now. So when you commit to an energy, you got to show that you can deliver that energy. So these pros and cons, you got to weigh very carefully. And that does require some engineering, understanding this design and operation of the system. So it's not just, there are some great benefits. And of course, you can also, some aspects of recirculation which are bad chemically, there are a lot of landfills have shown ammonia level increase in the waste when you stir up the leachate. And so that can be a problem. If that happens, you cannot really recirculate too long. This is actually from one of my sites. This data shows that due to recirculation, the landfill started generating more leachate. So the year 1 and year 2, which is the blue line and the red line, is when the recirculation was not done. And you can see the landfill is producing about 1.5 million gallons of leachate per year. And in the end of year 2, they started recirculating it. And you can see the green line, This is because of recirculation, the landfill started producing more leachate. It almost doubled the volume, because this volume, if you double it, when you recirculate, it doubles. Now, this landfill is very small. The recirculation was only focused on one area. That's why it doubled. In many landfills, if you are to spread the leachate, you will not necessarily a doubling. You will see a fraction increase, but you will definitely see an increase in leachate volumes. So it's not like the leachate is gone. It's really a temporary storage. It will enhance your gas production. Some of that will be consumed by bacteria, but some will make its way back. This data set is again from Professor Benson's paper. This shows that in the bioreactor landfill paper, that ammonia levels increasing after they started recirculating. So by studying up that leachate, so this is not necessarily an advantage of recirculation when you got it, but that does eventually make that leachate quality better by recirculating. So if now whichever country, whichever location you're sitting in, and you're dealing with landfill projects, how do you really know, is this recirculation a good idea at a landfill? Well, climate is your first friend. In the US, west of Mississippi, the US is fairly dry. And on the east of Mississippi, where everything is green, is very wet. Now, of course, on the wet side here, you generate more leachate. You want to actually manage the leachate using recirculation. But this is where you really cannot count on recirculation 100% of the time, maybe a small portion. On the other hand, here on the dry side, I would say almost you can manage majority of your leachate by recirculation if the state laws allow you to do that, because that's where I see a great benefit, because you're low on moisture there. And why discharge it to wastewater treatment plant? Manage it within the footprint. Try to get the best design in, get it operated, so you are actually having a zero discharge of leachate. I know there are people from other continents. I just picked a continent from India. Originally, I'm from Bombay here. And you can see Bombay gets about 60 inches of rainfall. So this west coast of India probably is not a good candidate for recirculation. It may be because the monsoon season is when it rains over 4 months. The remaining time it is dry. So maybe in those months you could, but the rest of India, which I put a little red bracket here, where the rainfall is less than about 40 inches, those are all great places for potentially managing leachate within the footprint by recirculation or by surface irrigation. Now I'm going to dive into the field methods which I tested. So my career with the recirculation started with this first project when I was at Michigan State. We got a funding to do a field scale demonstration of bioreactor technology. So the bioreactor technology is the advantages I talked to you about: recirculating leachate, getting more settlement, getting more gas. Now in Michigan, the climate is very cold, just like a northern part of India or part of Europe. Some parts of Turkey, China, northern China is very cold, where the bacteria cannot survive or cannot really do well. But they will not create a lot of gas. Here, in Michigan, we found some of the waste which was placed in winter was at 0 degrees C even after it was filled, because waste is a good insulator. So that was not producing any gas. So some of this instrumentation, the team I was working with, we designed, have some number of sampling ports here. We put a lot of sensors: water content, pressure, gas sensor, oxygen sensors. But this is a real bioreactor cell, about 7 or 8 acres in size, which is fully capped. And this is when I stumbled across, we had to recirculate. And I looked at the literature. The two methods showed up: horizontal trenches and vertical wells. That's it. Those are the two methods. And I had to pick one of them because this was my first project after I started my career in recirculation. And surface irrigation, of course, was a no-no. They would not accept that because the landfill was going to be capped. You can see the geomembrane on the cover. So we cannot put surface irrigation. It had to be subsurface. So when I was doing that, I come across this concept, which I'm going to talk about, which I developed and I patented. But I'm going to talk a little bit about horizontal trenches and vertical wells for you. So this photograph is from Professor Townsend's presentation. They had built a bioreactor cell in Florida, and I think they took a number of photos there. So they use this conventional method where the trench is, you excavate a trench in the landfill, and you put a pipe there, and you inject leachate. So in concept, this is what it looks like. You have to put a number of pipes, which are trenches here, and then you inject leachate in them. And what I found through modeling is, well, how do you design the spacing? Well, you don't really know the hydraulic conductivities of waste and the hydraulic properties. You can assume an injection pressure. The injection pressure decides how much the leachate is going to spread. But if you put too much injection pressure, then you can have a slow stability problem. So as a conservative designer, you want to space them far apart so you don't, inject too hard. And then in that place you got some areas where the leachate cannot reach, so you got these dry pockets here. So that's where the waste does not decompose as hard, and it doesn't settle, it settles here. So you got these ruts on the surface. So the surface is not straight, it is undulated at the end of the year or two. So this modeling shows actually how the moisture would distribute. I even modeled it with my PhD students at time using heterogeneity in the waste. And you can still see there are some dry pockets where the leachate doesn't reach. And this was confirmed later on by electrical resistivity surveys we did, that this is how exactly the weighting of the garbage happens. Then we came across, of course, the concept of vertical wells. This is what Professor Townsend built in Florida in the bioreactor landfill. So these are vertical wells where you drill a hole in the landfill, which is very expensive, by the way. To auger hole in a landfill is not a cheap task. You need special drill machines with a huge auger buckets. And then you inject leachate in it. So when we do that, this is what my modeling shows. The vertical wells I found are the least efficient hydraulically method. You can put like 10 gallons a minute, which is really not a whole lot of leachate, by the way. If the landfill is generating 100,000 gallons a day, you need a number of wells. So that is a problem, because you also have a gas collection system that you could flood. Just want to make sure the time here. So what this shows is basically, all these methods, conventional methods, which I stumbled across the time I was involved in bioreactor, have limitations of how much you can deliver, the spacing, how do you calculate the spacing? There are going to be dry pockets like this. How do you get over that? So I started thinking, and I came across this concept in my head, at least, which I modeled with the help of my students. And then I said, permeable blankets, why do we need so many pipes? So imagine this is the surface of the landfill where you want to recirculate leachate. So this is the surface of the landfill here. You put a very thin layer of any permeable material. That's why I call it permeable blanket. It doesn't need to be gravel. It doesn't need to be, it can be a recycled glass. It could be recycled shredded tires. It could be a geocomposite drainage layer, relatively thin though. And then you stick one pipe in the middle there, and you inject leachate. Well, actually, you cover that up. Of course, you cover that with garbage. And then, you inject leachate in here. So simple, basic hydraulics, of subsurface flow, just intuitively will tell you the liquid is going to travel to the permeable path pretty fast, because the head loss is much smaller here. The garbage has lower conductivity, so it's going to try to fill this cavity. If you put even a minimal injection pressure, you don't need a pressure more than a couple of PSI, very small amount of pressure. So there is no issues of slope stability because of the pressure you're injecting. It fills that up, and once it fills up, the leachate starts moving down gravity. So really now there is no dry pockets theoretically. The leachate is going to move wherever it is possible to move. There is no limitation here. As long as that permeable layer is continuous, it doesn't have any obstructions, and it is not blocked, the leachate flows through it, it'll flow like this. So this was simulated in the model, same model you saw the earlier plots, and you can see the 60-meter wide. So this blanket is almost 200 feet wide here, and you have one little pipe in the middle there. It fills up that blanket in a matter of minutes to hours, based on the injection rate. And then you can see the liquid is traveling. So there will be some dry pockets here, but that's not because of the blanket. It's because the garbage itself has different hydraulic properties preventing. But there is no theoretical limitation where the leachate cannot reach. Anyway, that was just the idea. That was modeled. That was then funded. And even, we looked at comparing trenches. You would need 7 to 15 trenches to be equivalent to a blanket. So that's a lot of pipe work, by the way, to build the trenches. You have to excavate. That's a lot of dealing with heavy equipment. It's not simple. And still you don't really know the guarantee of the design, because the spacing of the trenches, you really don't know how far the leachate is going to reach. So this was a motivating factor. The blankets can carry a lot more leachate. They're easy to build. You can use any cheap materials to build it. It's a landfill. Why do you want to put virgin pipes, great quality pipes in a landfill? It's going to be all eventually be waste. So might as well use waste as your blanket. So these are the benefits I just talked about. And also I fumbled across another benefit as the landfill started using it. You can actually use the blanket for extracting gas, because you have such an intimate contact with the garbage. It's a much better contact than a horizontal trenches the landfills use as the wells they use. So when you're not pumping leachate, you can actually extract gas by applying suction. So the same system can be dual use for injecting leachate and extracting gas, which makes it more sustainable to pull gases out of a landfill. And then the most exciting part for me as an academician, eventually I thought about when I put sensors, you can instrument this blanket and it becomes like a smart blanket. You can actually sense the properties of waste through the blanket, almost like, when you go to a doctor, they measure your vital signs, and that tells them a lot of things about your whole body. The smart blanket, the blanket instrumentation is much easier to put instrumentation in blanket, which is made up of gravel or sand or glass. Then you start putting sensors in the waste, they really lose their quality and life very quickly because waste is so heterogeneous. But the blanket is not heterogeneous. Blanket is a engineered heterogeneity. That's why I look at it. You introduce a heterogeneity in your design to overcome the complexity of waste. So this concept, which you saw numerically modeled, it was not tested at that point, was tested out at this site in Michigan. And so this is the top of the landfill I'm referring to here, where we build the blankets. So we built three blankets. One was a shredded tires blanket. One was made up of free recycled glass cullets. And the tires were free too, by the way. And the geocomposite drainage layer, this is made by geosynthetic manufacturers. This will cost you money on this project. Of course, this was a trial, so this was donated to this project because this geocomposite will act very similarly. At least that's what I thought. Then we actually just had one pipe in each of these blankets injecting leachate. No multiple pipes. The blanket is 200 foot long, so it's pretty long if you think about it. In that 200 feet distance, usually you would put at least 7 to 8 trenches, about 30 to 40 feet apart. So you would have 7 to 8 pipes. Here we're only using one pipe and running in a very short direction actually. And same thing for the geocomposite. And then we had an injection pressure monitor. We had a flow monitor to monitor the flow, injection pressure. And then the hypothesis and the modeling showed that leachate should travel through these blankets relatively quickly. That means to see that, we needed sensors. So we put water content sensors across the entire blankets. We put impedance sensors. We put pressure sensors. We put temperature sensors. We put load cells to measure the load on the blanket to see if these tires get crushed under the load and their hydraulic performance deteriorates as the landfill gets taller and taller and gets put a lot of vertical stress. So we had a number of sensors placed in this project. So these are the actual materials you see here. This is the decomposed shredded tires. They were not really shredded, they are decomposed. They were given free, and if whatever location you are in, you will get a lot of tires usually for a relatively small cost or free. This is the recycled glass. All the soft drink bottles we drink in Michigan and many other big cities, they would crush them and make into cullets, which sometimes go in concrete, sometimes go in some masonry work, but a lot of times really goes to drainage materials in landfills. And this is the geocomposite, which has a geonet inside. So this has basically a permeable drainage material. So the construction work looked like this. There's a very low mass geotextile placed on the ground, and then we put the tires there on top of it, and then another roll. So you can see the tires blanket here. Then you can see the crushed glass we built same way, and then we covered that with geotextile. So the garbage would be placed on top of it. So we don't want the garbage to end up in the glass. So we essentially created a geocomposite, but using crushed glass and using tires. And these blankets were built side by side because that's the only area they gave us on the landfill for this research demonstration. And you can see these cables here. These are the sensors I told you we installed. So this is an impedance-based sensor placed in the glass blanket that shows when the leachate, when you inject, if it arrives here, the impedance is going to drop because, impedance of leachate, which contains salts, is very low compared to dry blanket. So this was a very easy indicator for us to measure arrival of leachate front. This is a pressure sensor. This is there are 4 or 5 different pressure sensors placed here. This is an injection pipe. So we believe the highest pressure would be right by the injection pipe. And then there are other sensors placed further away from the pipe to see how the pressure drops, just like the model was showing. So you can see this nice close-up photographs. This is the geocomposite drainage layer, which is very easy to construct. You just lay it on the ground. That's it. You just lay it on the ground, and then we put the pipes, and boom, and then we put the garbage on top, and we are ready to inject leachate. So there is a lot of instrumentation, there is a lot of data loggers. So they are measuring this data, as we injected leachate a number of times over a period of 2 to 3 years. This is that magnetic flow meter we had installed in that incoming leachate line. So we can monitor how many gallons we're pumping and what is the rate we're pumping in, what is the injection pressure at the entry point, and then the pressure loss in the blanket. So pretty much had a very good mass balance as far as we injected. We understood the pressure in the system very well because slope stability is a concern. So we can really validate the numerical modeling results. In the field, does it really look like the model shows? Because often the model will show you some pretty graphs, but you need really a field truthing to be able to really confirm that. So you have a confidence when you design a number of systems like that. You can say, hey, we tested it really well, and the model does a good job, or these are the deficiencies in the model. So this is what the blankets looks like from a little aerial photo here. The shredded tires, you got a crushed glass blanket, and this is a geocomposite blanket, and then they all had injection pipe in the middle, which we injected leachate, and we hoped the leachate would travel across the blankets first before it started making its downward travel towards the leachate collection system. Okay, so we placed waste on top of these blankets before we started injecting leachate in it. So just to share some of the results here, this is the glass blanket you saw. The pipe divides the blanket in two sides, north side and south side. So if you can see, the injection rate here was 45 gallons a minute in that pipe. What you see on the y-axis is the moisture sensor, impedance sensor. So the impedances are relatively high. When the impedance drops, that tells us that leachate front arrived there. So this is the time when we started injecting a leachate. So you can see about 15 feet of distance, leachate travel in a less than about 30 minutes. Then 30 feet travel is a little over 30 minutes. And you can see the 60 feet sensor and then the 85-foot sensor here, which is basically almost half of the blanket here on the side of the pipe. Almost took 2 hours for the leachate to travel at 45 gallons a minute. When we increase that leachate rate to 140 gallons a minute, so that's almost 3 times more, you can see the travel times became much faster here. The 15 feet it reached in about 8 minutes. This is about 15 minutes, 30 feet. And the entire blanket it reached in less than 40 minutes. This is exactly what the model has shown us with plus or minus of a couple of hours. So it's a relatively, definitely the blanket was filling up with leachate. There is no doubt about that. The sensors confirm that. Same thing with the tires. This is the scrap tires blanket, 140 gallons a minute. You can see that entire blanket was filled up in less than 30 minutes. So the tires were actually more permeable than the glass, which we knew because they had a huge voids. It was big chunky tires. So it's a function of hydraulic conductivity. Higher the hydraulic conductivity, faster the travel time because smaller the head loss. So we're able to fill the blankets up. I'm not showing you the geocomposite data because I have a full published paper on it, and it showed equally effective to other 2 blankets. But the next exciting part of the blanket was actually the pressure head. I'm just going to watch my time here. I'm coming to my 5-10 minutes, so I'm going to wrap through this slide. So the pressure buildup in the blanket, you can see when we injected leachate, the pressure sensor, which was very close to the pipe, was showing a head up about 40 centimeters, which is very small, by the way. The injection is less than 1 psi. We're injecting at about 2 psi. So there was a small loss there. And then there was a more and more loss as leachate traveled further on in the blanket. So this is the distance in the blanket it has traveled to build the head loss. When we stop pumping, you will see the leachate pressures would drop off. That means that leachate, which is filled in the blanket, would gradually dissipate by infiltrating into the waste. So we also monitor the temperature, which was of the leachate. You can see when you inject leachate, you're changing the temperature of the waste, and then it comes back to its original temperature to some extent. So this blanket started acting like a sensing platform. So you can see a number of trials we did here. For each trial, we injected leachate. So this is the leachate injection trial, which happened over a period of 2 to 3 hours every other week, every week, just depending on how the operator wanted to do it. And these are how the pressure heads built up in the blanket over time. As you can see, as time is going on, the pressure heads are increasing and increasing. And that's because what we found through modeling, we modeled this in high resolution. We found that If the hydraulic conductivity of the garbage decreases, the pressure head will increase because it is now going to build up to dissipate that pressure. So this blanket became an indirect way to measure the hydraulic conductivity of the garbage. So that led to actually a phenomenal project for doing control lab experiments, where we built actually the whole landfill in a box with sensors just like you saw in the field, but we miniaturized it into a model which looks something like this in my lab, where we have a lot of pressure sensors, and then we built a blanket there, mini blanket, and then we actually did a number of leachate injection trials here in this little blanket. And usually, you do lab experiment first and you go to the field, but I always, sometimes, I like do something in the field because that's an opportunity you get to demonstrate something for the benefit of the sponsor. And then I got a fundamental research project to do more you can do with these blankets. So this blanket actually, in these photos, I'm kind of going through quickly, where we did a number of trials here of injecting leachate and measuring how we can estimate the hydraulic conductivity of this subsurface material indirectly by sensors. So using inverse modeling. So you're actually not taking any samples of the garbage. You're using the blanket as a sensing platform to measure the hydraulic conductivity. Because you can see when you inject leachate, you're building a pressure head in the blanket, and that pressure head is a function of the hydraulic conductivity here. So we're able to correlate that through unsaturated flow modeling, where we can build these pressure heads, and the pressure heads dissipate when you stop injecting, just like we saw in the field. And then we converted this information actually into hydraulic conductivity. So this is the permeability we estimated in this lab setup using the blanket method, using the indirect method, versus the direct method was using falling head test. You can see these numbers are very close to each other. So as we kept injecting, the degree of saturation of that sand you saw in the picture went up. When it becomes almost 100% saturated, the hydraulic conductivity numbers you can see stabilized here. They basically tell us that was the hydraulic conductivity, which is within a factor of 1 or 2 here of the actual conductivity. So the measurements are fairly accurate using this method. This method of blankets has been used in a number of landfills in the US since this project took off. You can see this blanket in action. There is no sensors here. I was involved in designing it. This is a huge blanket. This is a gigantic blanket I designed in northern part of US. This blanket can deliver 500,000 gallons of leachate in a matter of 4 hours. 500,000 gallons. That's a significant. The cost saving for the client was about $20,000 a day by putting this blanket, which is made up of cheap tires. This blanket is almost 1,000 foot long and 200 feet wide. And there are a number of blankets like this in Texas they use heavily. So clearly the benefits you can see for the blankets, but if the benefits of recirculation outweigh, then it makes sense. Some landfills you may not be able to recirculate because it's just there is too many risks and too many concerns. And the blanket you can use as a sensing platform for monitoring the hydraulic performance of landfills in the field, which otherwise you cannot do easily, because landfills are very heterogeneous bodies, and collecting data across the heterogeneous system is a very time-consuming task, and it becomes a very statistical task. With a blanket, you introduce an engineered heterogeneity, and you overcome the heterogeneity of the waste in a way by using the blanket as a platform. So you can, in real time, monitor the performance of the landfills. As the landfills become much and more sophisticated, I see that happening. So a lot of this work I showed you related, got into 3 patterns. One was to extract gas from the landfills. One was you can actually use these blankets made up of reactive materials. Like you can use biochar, you can use zero valent ion, and you can inject leachate, and you can treat the leachate as you inject it. So you are getting cleaner leachate coming out of the landfill than what it started. Then also you can, use this as a sensing platform for sensing hydraulic and thermal properties at the field scale. So you're getting the scale of the entire landfill as a block measured as an average, rather than spatial variations you're trying to measure using sensors. And I have published a number of papers. If any of this, I know the time is limited, so I'm gonna stop here, but if any of this is of interest to you, you're working on this as a student or as a faculty or as a practitioner, and you need to get any copies of the paper, I have a lot of this work published. Not everything you saw is published, unfortunately. It will be published eventually. So feel free to email me. But with that, I'm gonna stop.